Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024, and today on the Roundup we're going to be answering three questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last 7 days. And as we do each week, we take our questions that we answer here on Wednesday from our newsletter that comes out on Mondays, and that's called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And I'm going to be dropping a few links in the chat today as we go, not only for the newsletter, but also for the different news stories that we're going to be covering. If you follow along and you have either the email version or the LinkedIn version of the newsletter available, I'll drop those links in as well. You can follow along with many of the stories that we're going to be referencing as we answer these questions today. But between the email version of the newsletter and now the LinkedIn version of the newsletter, we have well over 2,000 subscribers in the international ed community that are regularly receiving our news content every Monday, either at 9 a.m. Eastern if you get the email version, or at 8:30 a.m. if you prefer your international ed news via LinkedIn. So we're really happy that so many international educators are making the newsletter a regular part of their weekly news intakes. So thank you again for helping us get the message out about the newsletter, both through the newsletter itself as well as here on the roundups, where we talk about the issues of the day that impact us all in international education circles, particularly here in the U.S. So we're going to be getting into our newsletter content this week, and the first real story that popped off the page at me is particularly time sensitive for me because I'm leaving to visit this country next week on Saturday. It's about Vietnam, and the question is, why is Vietnam such a thriving market for U.S. colleges? And I think what we've seen in the course of the history of higher education interest in the United States by students in Vietnam, it's been going on for well over 20 years. It started in the noughties, late 90s, early noughties, when you started to see there really be an economic middle class that had the capacity to go overseas for their higher education. And it started primarily with community colleges back in those days. And it's since evolved as the country has grown economically in its strength and power. Higher education has become more of a priority for the government and providing more seats for undergraduates to do degrees. And when we saw Vietnamese coming initially, it was almost exclusively at the undergrad level and almost all at the community college level initially 20 years ago. And now we're seeing many more full degree seeking undergraduates coming. We're seeing interest in graduate programs, largely from Vietnamese that might already be in the United States finishing a bachelor's degree, maybe coming back to do a master's. But we also see master's degree candidates coming direct from Vietnam after they finish a bachelor's degree there. As the economy has grown in Vietnam, the rising middle class has allowed more of its population to seek out overseas education. And the U.S. is it's not the top destination for Vietnamese. I think Japan is. But we see a lot of institutions from the United States really prioritizing Vietnam in the last few years. And that has expanded through the growth of educational agents in Vietnam and more reliable ones, through folks like IDP who have offices there, through Applied Board and others that have invested time, resources, Adventist as well, these aggregators having offices there. You now also see some master agencies that basically coordinate amongst a smaller group of agencies within the country to provide kind of a one-stop shop service for institutions to receive their applications from Vietnamese agents through them. So there's a degree of quality control in those kind of services as well. That's basically what we've chosen to do at UNLV. The Vietnamese students we have received from agent partners make up the majority of our Vietnamese students now that we receive each year. A couple in particular, IDP and GSM, Global Student Mobility, are our two main agencies that have produced students for us from Vietnam. And we've been investing time, energy, and resources in traveling there the last 2-3 years, and we'll be doing so again this weekend. But it's become not just for an institution like UNLV that is relatively new to international student recruitment in formal ways within the last 3 years. It's also attracting institutions from the middle of the United States that have maybe perhaps lower price points, lower cost of living, that can attract a wider range of students coming from Vietnam to the United States, where even though the economy has expanded significantly, it still tends to be a more price-sensitive market. So some of the Midwestern schools in the U.S. or lower cost state institutions do have a good product that they can sell to Vietnamese students and parents. So there's really some of that popping up. Now, what we're seeing, some of the article that I'm referencing here, I've dropped the link in, is from ISEF Monitor, and they have. And Umesh, thanks for getting on from Kathmandu. I hope all is well. I hope that your family was unaffected by a number of the flooding incidents that have happened in some of the more rural areas. Hope everybody is well in Nepal. There's some areas of the United States that have also experienced incredible flooding in the southeast right now after Hurricane Helene. Parts of western North Carolina are unrecognizable. Friends who have worked there tell me it's just an absolute disaster area. So obviously, very much hope that everybody is well with you in Nepal. Thank you for getting on. And Umesh, one of our partner agencies in Nepal for UNLV at Motif Study Abroad. Motif Education Abroad. Thank you for being on with us today. Now, when it comes to Vietnam, it really represents a country that is on the up on a lot of different levels, but also becoming a more sophisticated market in terms of where students are going. We see that there's two trends that friends at ISEF Monitor have put together in their market snapshot, which is one of the basis for this question today. Two most important trends are a huge proportion of students choosing to remain in Asia and choosing Korea, actually. Not just Japan, and the popularity of transnational education in Vietnam and a growing number of international schools in the country. So the international schools certainly have been popping up throughout Vietnam for many months and last 4 or 5 years. And that's typical, but all international schools are not created equally. Particularly the newer ones that perhaps don't invest in the college counseling fields. A lot of their students really are kind of groping around in the dark trying to find their way to colleges if they're looking outside Vietnam. So many of these schools now in Vietnam have partnerships with some of the agencies, educational agencies, who can provide that kind of advising service for good or worse, better or worse, depending on the school, depending on the quality of the educational agency. You see a lot of them really having some issues in terms of are they getting the best advice if the agency is only referring their students to fee-paying, commission-paying institutions that they have agreements with. So a lot of potential interesting challenges there. But in terms of what some of the there's a kind of great profile of the Vietnamese market in terms of English proficiency, language of instruction, religion, if that's interesting to you. The largest cities, the outbound mobility, 137,000 is the last UNESCO count of Vietnamese studying outside of their home country. They represent within Southeast Asia. Vietnam represents 37% of all as a percentage of or number of students from Southeast Asia who are studying abroad. 37% of them are from Vietnam, ahead of Malaysia at 16%, as well as Indonesia 16%, Thailand at 9%. So the market is again close to 140,000 studying abroad. In the United States, we're sitting at, I think it's about 16, 17,000, maybe up to 20,000 now. So we have not even what do we have? We have a seventh of that number. Seventh of their total number are studying in the United States. So we are seeing some interesting trends, and yes, there are more starting to look closer to home. Japan, Korea, again, are the most affordable, are more affordable than perhaps the Western destinations of UK, Australia, US, and Canada. But the options that they have even within their country, and that's one of the points of the ISEF article, is that a number of colleges and universities, most notably from the UK and Australia, have had operations in country to deliver their education, their degrees to students in person. They obviously don't have the massive campuses that the home institutions have. They're typically in an office building. There's no real identity in those programs, and just they don't. They potentially can transfer there to the home campus in the UK or Australia if they want, but the majority are seeing that as an opportunity to get a degree from a Western institution without leaving the country. And to some families where tend to be very price sensitive, that might be more of a practical option for them. And there are increasingly more domestic options beyond TNE. Vietnamese universities have increased in capacity and increased in quality over recent years, so there's more options for them to stay there. So we look at one of the things that you have seen, we've certainly felt it at UNLV, is over the last decade, we've seen a number of Vietnamese students coming to us who actually were in the U.S. to finish their high school first and then come to us for bachelor's degree programs. And the smart ones decided to come to a Catholic school in Nevada, spent their last year or two in Nevada graduating from a Nevada high school, and then qualifying for in-state tuition. So that allows them to certainly reduce their costs significantly. So that market, there's I think in 2022, the number of students unfortunately in high schools hasn't recovered significantly from the pandemic. They were pre-pandemic at about almost 6,000 Vietnamese students in high schools or K through 12 programs. But it's still down. I think it was down to just under 3,000 in 2022, at least on this report in the ISEF monitor. They don't have anything further. There's more recent data and actually real-time data we could pull from Stevens by the numbers, but I didn't have a chance to do that before this session today. But certainly those that know where to look will be able to find that information very quickly. So we see a lot of movement in terms of where the major destinations are that we are looking at outside of Vietnam for students studying in Vietnam outside of the borders, beyond Korea that now has I think 73,000. Japan has 49,000. Australia about 33,000. Then Taiwan had 24,000. So they are also studying large numbers in China, actually, in 27,000 there in 21-22, and just under 22,000 in Open Doors 23 last year, and 17,000 in Canadian schools. So I think our numbers in Vietnam are probably closer to 25,000 now, 25,000. So UK, the UK actually is lagging significantly at only 5,000 going to the UK. But they do have, as we said earlier, a significant TNE offered in country, so that probably impacts the number going direct to the UK for higher education. So great article from ISEF Monitor, so definitely check that out if you're at all interested in Vietnam. And I'll have some comments after I return from my trip to Vietnam next week to let you know how things are faring. I'll be spending time in Saigon, Da Nang, and Hanoi as I meet with our agent partners in Vietnam. Now let's move on to our next question, and that is, how are institutions adapting to global change? Now, there are a variety of different ways that I've seen institutions react, and not just in the United States, but in Canada, US, UK. There are those that, when opportunities arise, are like cargo ships trying to turn. It's a very slow process and takes months, if not years, to actually effect change. There are nimble institutions there that have funded independent international leadership at institutions that allow them to quickly pivot and have control and staffing to make quick changes to communication flows, to where they recruit, the kinds of recruitment that they do. And those institutions are probably the ones that are best equipped to adapt to the changing times. And when I say changing times, we're talking not, again, with our focus on developing global perspective in all that we do, is focused not just on the change that's happening at our institution, or even change within a government structure that impacts immigration flows or student visas or anything like that. We're talking about global change, how different countries' responses to immigration challenges that they're facing in their countries, whether it be strains on human resources and human services that the countries offer, healthcare, housing, food service, other services related, employment. All of those have been stretched in some of the larger major destinations and even some of the smaller ones. You see governments reacting with changes in policies, restrictions to numbers, eliminating certain categories of student-related dependents, like they've done in the UK, by increasing funding that students will have to show for their maintenance, monthly maintenance, to having job salaries that qualify for the graduate route in the UK being raised, because to make it actually reflective of the reality, and that prices some students out of certain jobs. So there's a lot of different things happening. We won't even go into Australia. We've talked about that before. Canada, we've talked about that before. We're going to talk about the UK in a minute. But an article that popped recently is also from ISIF Monitor, on how the Big Four study destinations are adapting in a year of change. And it talks through, obviously, there was ISIF held a global summit in London recently that brought together sector leaders in Australia, Canada, US, UK. The themes included stressing the links between recruitment and student outcomes, which we talk about every week here on the Roundup. The need to build better links to industry and policymakers, absolutely. And the importance of data-based insights for decision makers across the sector. And that, more than anything, is how probably the single biggest change of perspective in how international offices are supposed to operate in probably the last decade, and certainly within the last 6 years since the pandemic, pre-pandemic, the kind of functional data decisions that need to be made, and why you're recruiting in a certain market, what's the ROI from your efforts in this country versus that country, how are we determining long-term success. All these things are what are popping popping up regularly for us. And in terms of what countries are doing differently, some institutions, like I said earlier, who are trying to ignore the problem and say, oh, we'll be fine, it's just a phase, let's stick their head in the sand and just keep going as they've been going, they're going to suffer the most. You see institutions in Canada, UK, Australia that are saying we're going to go bankrupt. Financially, we're become so dependent on these international students, we won't be able to survive if we have to deal with even a 5, 10, 15% cut in the number of students that are coming from overseas to our countries. That institutions in Canada are certainly dealing with now, but they've had a 45% drop in interest in the past year in study permits issued. You see continued decreases next year already being planned to be implemented. Reputational damage has been done by these cuts in Australia, UK, and Canada. So what are they doing? The institutions that really focus on those things that matter most to students, and the three that I mentioned there, links between recruitment and outcomes, having outcomes data and ROI in terms of what the percentage of graduates get jobs in their fields within a certain amount of time after graduation, the average starting salaries for international students, the kind of micro data that you want to be able to get to eventually, to have a well-oiled machine and that can constantly cycle back that kind of data into decisions in terms of we're graduating a lot of successful students in this field and this major from this country. Let's make sure we're capturing some of those stories and then reinforcing that in our messages to prospective students. And that the schools that are able to do that well in terms of making those links between recruitment and outcomes are the ones that are best positioned to succeed longer term. The other larger picture questions are, besides the data, of building better industry links and policymaker links to government officials. We all have government affairs units of our colleges that should be active in obviously working with legislators both in their states and nationally in DC, but how many are well versed in talking about the international ed issues? How regularly do you meet with that team to reinforce here are the messages we need to be sharing with our elected officials? You're the ones out there doing that. Please make sure that these get shared with the appropriate people. How are we doing on that front? With regards to links to industry, this also ties to outcomes. What are the job opportunities? What are the internships that your students can do? Those are the two basic ones that most commonly come to mind. But think about industry partnerships that you have in developing academic programming, in developing micro-credentials and professional development certificates for their staff. Are you making those connections? Are you creating new majors as a result of needs and conversations you've had with industry folks that you have connections with? We do that all the time at UNLV. It's very much a part of how our new programs are developed, whether it's our entertainment engineering or entertainment technology and design programs, to cybersecurity, data analytics, water resource management, these interdisciplinary programs that bring together units from across the campus to create a degree and to create a skill set in graduates that meets the needs of our employers. Now, beyond just the traditional needs that we always see listed of, hey, we want students who are great communicators, problem solvers, can work well in teams, can function and can be excellent public speakers. All those things are skills that U.S. institutions develop as a part of their liberal arts philosophies, as of their general education requirements at the undergrad level. A little harder to do that at the grad level, but certainly that's a focus of what we do, and building in those skills that industry leaders tell us they always need to see, in addition to focusing on developing skill sets for particular jobs or careers that are just now being developed. And when I have conversations with future students, I'm always talking to them about, hey, the job you might do when you graduate university in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, may not even exist yet. And their eyes just kind of get all big. It's like, oh my gosh, you're right. That might be the case. And they can't imagine it's true, but that's the reality of how fast things are moving in this profession, in this world, in this economy, with things like AI coming in and impacting almost every field possible. How does that impact future jobs that students might be applying for or getting when they graduate? So a really positive article. And one of the other things beyond just the View from Here article on that ICEF Monitor put out after their global summit. Also something like, hey, what are the postgraduate work opportunities in the major markets? So there's a Study International piece on that, on post-study work visa options in some of the major markets. So do check that out. And that's, again, knowledge that you want to have to become better aware of what the competition is doing. And when you can say to a student that, hey, if you're coming for a STEM program in the United States, you got 3 years per degree level. So after you finish a bachelor's degree, you can potentially work for 3 years. You can come back and do a master's degree, work for another up to 3 years. Come back and do a doctoral program, work for another 3 years. And by that time, they've probably got enough work experience that they'll get in with somebody that's willing to sponsor them for an age, if not somewhere in between before that happens. So the opportunities really are some of the most significant. And when you know that what we offer in the U.S. for STEM graduates versus what might be available in the UK or in Canada or in Australia, other major destinations. And when you know that, you're better equipped to make that point. You can craft messaging to your future students that reflects, hey, if you're looking to work in country after you're done, the U.S. has one of the best opportunities available if you're in a STEM program. So you can have that conversation and reference some of these policies in other countries, because you know, and you should know by now, that students aren't applying just to the U.S. anymore. They could be applying to U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and China for post undergraduate studies or post-secondary school studies. So really need to be aware of what's happening around you so that you can better make the case on your campus for why you need to be doing things perhaps slightly differently than you are. So our last question of the day is, how is the UK in particular responding to some of the real-time drops they're seeing from India, from Nigeria, and a couple other markets that were heavily dependent on the dependents being able to come with students for master's degree programs. They've had to make some very significant pivots. We know that amongst UK universities, there are ones that really don't need to worry about their numbers too much, because again, the UK has not imposed cuts in terms of we're accepting 25% less or 30% less international students in the coming year. They haven't done that. The policies have led to declines, including the dependent study visa ban, increasing the amount required of students come this January, and other changes to graduate route jobs that are available, as we talked a little bit earlier, in terms of salary requirements. Those are changing, and institutions that in the past couple of years have said, hey, if even though you've been admitted, you've got a scholarship, you're all set and ready to come, don't come unless you have housing. Institutions were doing that in the UK in the last couple of years. That's just messaging that doesn't help anybody. You do have a new Labour government that has said that, hey, we want to continue to welcome international students to the UK, to our universities, but they are not putting their money where their mouth is. They're not going to be bailing out the institutions that are financially struggling during this down period here because of the drops in the number of student visas issued. They're not doing anything financially to support them. They may get to the point where they have to raise fees, domestic fees, or raise international student fees, put together other fees altogether. So there are ways that in the UK, the government isn't really helping. Certainly better than what the Conservative government was pretending to offer in terms of help. But you now have the UK institutions looking at India, that had relied on India and Nigeria, are really having to shift focus because they had been so reliant on the dependent study visas to allow family members to come, that now that they're not able to come, and combine that with an economic collapse of the Naira in Nigeria, you see huge drop-offs there. So we're looking at the visas down from 498,000 to 432,000 in 2024 versus 23, but still up over 2022, where they're still coming out of the pandemic. But the downward trend is likely to continue. But there are universities who are looking at shifting their marketing strategies, where the top 5 countries that have seen most significant drops in numbers. In terms of percentage drops, Nigeria, 46% drop, Bangladesh, 44% drop, Sri Lanka, 28% drop, India, 23% drop, and Hong Kong, 21% drop. All those 20+ % drops, and amongst just those top 5 countries, we're talking well over 165,000 less, or a percentage drop in visas in those countries. So very significant drops from them. So where are they looking to now? Where they've seen increases and more activity? They've seen increases in Nepal, as Australia's kind of been shut off as a primary outlet there. They're up to a 63% increase in students getting visas from Nepal, 37% increase in students from Myanmar. And then you see some Central Asian, Azerbaijan, Afghanistan, and then Turkey, Kenya, Pakistan, Zimbabwe, Kazakhstan, and Qatar, rounding up the largest increases of 10% up to 63% more of student visas going to the UK. So the Pakistani one is interesting. Pakistan has overtaken Nigeria to become the 3rd largest source of students after China and India. So we'll see what happens, but certainly those are some countries that the UK universities are going after. But you also see West African, largely French-speaking African students are also becoming targets for UK universities. So West and North African are the French-speaking Arabic countries, and the West African sub-Saharan communities of countries of Ivory Coast, Cameroon, Gabon, Senegal as well. You see a lot of interest there increasing to the UK. and to the US and Canada. So there's a lot of opportunity, and UK institutions are starting to pivot. At least the smart ones are making the effort to really get ahead of the cars of the downward trend in some of the major markets and find those new ones that can help hopefully supplement the losses or offset the losses that they're going to be seeing from some of their major markets for year two of this decline from or fallout from the dependent study ban and other negative news. So that's all we have for you this week on the Roundup. I appreciate you being a part of the conversation. Again, next week we're going to be in Vietnam, so won't be doing a live next week, but I'll be back with you the third week. I think it's going to be the third week. Yep, third week of October. We'll be back with you live for the Midweek Roundup. So thanks again for your joining in the conversation. Look forward to chatting with you again soon. Cheers.